Hello, my name is Chris Roldan, and today my presentation will focus on the history of asbestos in Libby, Montana. Here is the table of contents and purpose of the presentation. I will review the background of vermiculite mining in Libby, Montana, go through a couple of figures that outline how much of the vermiculite reached different places in the United States, describe the health impact on miners who work there, describe the residual environmental impacts on the previous mining site, and review epidemiologic data on the health impacts of asbestos from Libby. Libby, Montana is located near the Canadian-US border in northwest Montana. In 1881, gold miners discovered vermiculite in Libby. Also referred to as zonolite, vermiculite was used as soil conditioner and in a variety of construction materials like insulation for homes and buildings. Libby specifically may have produced 80% of the world's supply of vermiculite. In 1963, W.R. Grace bought the zonolite mining operations, and it lasted until 1990. The vermiculite from the Libby mine was contaminated with the toxic and highly friable form of asbestos called tremolite actinolite series asbestos. It's also known as, and will hereon be referred to, as Libby amphibole. Libby amphibole is carcinogenic, known to cause lung cancer and other respiratory illnesses like mesothelioma and asbestosis. EPA's removal program began conducting investigations and removal actions to address Libby amphibole beginning in 2000. It was placed on the Superfund program's National Priorities List in October 2002. In 2009, for the first time in the history of the agency, the EPA declared a public health emergency. The EPA has made significant progress in reducing the amount of Libby amphibole in the area. They say the amount of Libby amphibole in air in downtown Libby is now nearly 100,000 times lower than when the vermiculite mine and mill were operating. Investigation and cleanup of the site was completed in 2018, with the exception of the former vermiculite mine and forested areas, referred to as Operable Unit 3. Figure 1 shows data on the amount of vermiculite received in different counties of the U.S. On the lower end of the spectrum, Hillsborough, Florida received about 100,000 tons of vermiculite, while on the higher end, Union, Ohio received almost 500,000 tons of vermiculite from Libby. This demonstrates how much vermiculite Libby produced and also shows how much Libby amphibole these different places were exposed to because of the reception of the product. The counties listed in the x-axis have a vermiculite facility owned by W.R. Grace, and data was collected through past invoices confirming these facilities received a vermiculite from Libby. This study was done by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry to identify exposure pathways past, present, and future to Libby amphibole. Another study was done to assess the impact of pleural plaques on long-term lung function in vermiculite miners of Libby, Montana. Pleural plaques are a medical way of identifying previous exposure to asbestos. In this study, high-resolution computed tomography was used as the main investigative tool. 128 miners were categorized according to their HRCT results. They were either assigned normal scan, denoted by NCTS, pleural plaques only, PPO, pleural plaques and interstitial fibrosis, PPIF, and other computed tomography abnormalities, OCTA. Pulmonary function tests were conducted on the miners between 1988 and 2012, and data was collected for an average 7.1 year follow-up period. Almost all miners performed at least 3 pulmonary function tests. Based on the data collected in the 24 years, regression analysis was performed to create a trend line for the different groups that shows a lung function at ages 40, 60, and 80. I chose to focus on FEV1%. FEV1 is the maximal amount of air you can forcefully exhale in 1 second. It is then converted to a percentage of normal, so anything below 80% of normal is considered abnormal. At age 40, all groups were normal, but by age 80, the PPO, PPIF, and OCTA lung functions were seen as abnormal or below 80%. This shows the result of asbestos inhalation lung function decline. This figure shows the history of fires in Operable Unit 3. Remember, OU3 is what the EPA and USDA refers to the previous vermiculite mine and the surrounding forest area. The history of fires is important because when there's a fire in OU3, there is a risk for asbestos to be released in the air. Therefore, data was collected on number of forest fires to measure the risk of asbestos exposure. Some years, no fire took place, whereas in 2007, for example, 11 fires took place. That year, there was a high risk of asbestos exposure in Libby. Epidemiologic studies have been conducted on the population surrounding the mine to measure the health outcomes and their association with exposure to asbestos. In one study, respiratory symptoms of children while the mine was active was compared against amount of asbestos exposure. The study found a positive association between respiratory symptoms like coughing, shortness of breath, bloody phlegm, and lung disease with handling asbestos, or rather vermiculite installation. In the table, I chose to show the association of activities potentially involving Libby amphibole with lung disease. Cases of lung disease were selected for along with controls. They were stratified into the amount of activities individuals participated in that involved handling Libby amphibole. An example was having played in vermiculite piles. The odds ratio is a statistical measurement that shows the risk of the health outcome, lung disease, due to an exposure, activities involving Libby amphibole. An odds ratio of 1 shows no association between exposure and health outcome, and an odds ratio over 1 shows a positive association between exposure and outcome. All three exposure groups of activities showed a positive association between Libby amphibole and lung disease. In this mortality study, data was collected on death of the community members in Libby, Montana from 1979 to 2011. Statistical techniques were used to separate the population who worked in the mines, so the table shows all cases compared to non-worker cases. The investigators found that the community members were experiencing a high rate of asbestos-related mortality, not just the vermiculite miners. This is represented by the standard mortality ratio, SMR, comparing observed amount of death and the expected amount of deaths. In this example, a total of 0.58 deaths are expected in the U.S. population due to asbestosis. In the non-worker cases column, 17 males died from asbestosis, while only 0.55 were expected to die. Therefore, the SMR was 30.64, which is considered very high. As you can see in the female column for both all cases and non-worker cases, the SMRs were over 600. The confidence interval is also listed in this table, which provides a range in which the SMR was supposed to fall into based on statistical calculations. Overall, this data shows a significantly high prevalence of death due to asbestosis in the Libby population versus the expected amount of deaths. I've covered the history of vermiculite mining in Libby, Montana, showed how much of it has been domestically exported within the U.S., illustrated the occupational health impacts and residual environmental hazard potential in Operable Unit 3, and showed health impacts and mortality data on the surrounding community in Libby, Montana. Thank you for watching this presentation on the EPA's first declared public health emergency.